Hi everyone. Today we are speaking about job interviews. Here to give you some advice that can set you up for success is our guest, Jia Wei Cao. He's a career coach at Stony Brook University's Career Center, specializing in diversity initiatives. Jia Wei, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Great. So to start off, let's talk about preparing for the job interview. Can you walk us through some of the most important things to do before the interview?
Definitely. So I always say that preparation is key to a successful interview. Researching the company or organization, including the interviewer or the interviewers, sometimes you're going to have the entire team interview you. So that's very crucial. You want to try to find things that the company that resonate with you, such as any projects or initiatives that they're spearheading, any leading industry things that are unique to a certain company, things to avoid when doing research. Don't read to them facts or numbers that you took from their website. This is stuff that they already know. So I would also suggest researching the company culture. Depending on what it is, the tone or the way you want to present yourself could be different from what you're expecting. So you should always try to know who is interviewing you. More often than not, I would say employers will let you know who's the person interviewing you, whether it be a first round interview with someone from HR or someone from the team itself. You want to try to look them up. LinkedIn is a wonderful tool. Most people working for large organizations, they will have their profiles updated on LinkedIn. So it's a good opportunity for you to learn a little bit more about their work history and what they do at the company. If not, company bios are usually a good place to go. You'll be able to see, breakdown as well as the org chart on some of the other companies' contact information page. And you want to try to have their contact information with you on hand in case you need to contact them. Sometimes I've had students tell me that they're running late to an interview or something is happening. The time that you're scouring looking for the contact information, right, could be changing their impressions on you. So you want to make sure that you have that contact information on hand in case something happens. I recommend putting together your outfit the night before. I always like knowing what I'm going to wear before I'm going to an interview the day before. Always go to bed early. Try to wake up early if you can, especially if your interview is in the morning. Try to be up at least a few hours before the interview so you're ready to go. You're all warmed up for the day. I try to give myself a 2 to 3 hour buffer period. I recommend that to all the students I work with. It also gives you enough time in case there's some last minute emergency or last minute changes that you want to make. It's also a good time to kind of calm yourself down. Definitely don't make any major changes during this time. You don't want to do your resume during this two hours. You're going to drive yourself crazy. I'm always very big on breakfast, especially if your interviews in the morning. Try to eat something light that won't upset your stomach or give you the runs later. And nothing too smelly, right? No garlic for breakfast, definitely when you're going on an interview. So I would say that pretty much preparation for me, that's the advice I would give. And it's worked for me, so it worked for a lot of students. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So kind of building off of that now to the day of, can you walk us through some of the most important things to bring to the interview? Or, I mean, with so many online right now, maybe have by your side while you're doing the interview.
Absolutely. So definitely have your resume on hand. Back when we were going to interviews in person, I would always tell students, however many people is going to be interviewing you, try to bring 2 times as many as that resume. You never know what's going to happen, who you're going to run into. Try to have your references also ready. Sometimes if the interview goes well enough, they might ask you for references on the spot. In that case, you want to make sure all the people who are going to be your referrals, they're alerted that somebody's going to be contacted. You never want to let the person know after the fact that you already listed you as a reference. So in terms of interview things to bring, I would say try to avoid bringing a backpack to an interview. I know a lot of college students, especially if you're jumping back and forth between classes and then going to an interview on the same day of, try to avoid bringing a backpack. It doesn't look professional. Contrast whatever outfit you're wearing. A nice shoulder bag or a messenger bag is a good alternative. Sometimes you might just want to go with no bag at all, especially if you're going straight to an interview. A Padfolio is another good item to have. It's going to have that notepad that's inside, as well as space for you to put pens, as well as business cards that you received during an interview as well. If you have business cards, definitely bring them. You want to try to leave an impression. Sometimes the resume might be too much to hand somebody, especially if you just met them. I recommend that students make business cards. They don't cost a lot. You can go very minimalist and they'll have a huge effect. Just your basic contact information, as well as what you're currently doing or something like that. Really could be a game changer if you have the business card. Try to silence your phone. That's always good advice. I see students sometimes their texts are going off in the middle of the interview. No one is going to say anything, right? But it's distracting. You don't want that there. So in terms of what you're wearing, I always go business. I always recommend business professional unless stated otherwise. You want to try to wear a top with a collar that buttons down. Try to avoid too crazy bright colors. Go with something dark color suit with matching pants and shoes. Absolutely no jeans, no sneakers unless stated otherwise. And you want to try to basically just minimize anything that might distract the interviewer from your responses. So go light on the cologne, go light on the perfume, flashy jewelry. Be mindful of piercings, exposed tattoos, hair color, and facial hair. There are some organizations that do have policies about those. And while, again, an organization that's more traditional, I'm thinking Enterprise Holdings, that's one of the companies that we work with here at Stony Brook. They gave a whole workshop talking a little bit about what are the expectations for people that work there. So we live in very modern times, and depending on what the industry is, might have different appearances. So something to think about as well, depending on who you're interviewing with. So.
Okay, great. So now to the questions you might be asked. Obviously, they will vary depending on the job you're applying for, but there are some general questions that are common in most every job interview. So can you walk us through some of those common questions and give us some insight into how they should be answered?
Sure. I'll give you my top three. This is the one that's the loaded question that you're probably going to be asked right at the beginning of the interviews. It's everybody's least favorite question to ask. It's the tell me about yourself question. And essentially what I've told students to think about this is it's your practice pitch when you're at a networking event or let's say a fair, right? You want to try not to go too deep here and go too far ahead of what the interviewer is planning on asking. You don't want to answer the next three questions all at once. So usually this should be somewhere around the 2 to 3 minute range. You don't want to go over that. This is really your opportunity to kind of show your value as a candidate and establish why you can come in and do the job that they're asking you to do. So the best way to do this is really just directly link any experiences that you've had in either previous roles that allowed you to develop these skills that they're looking for. They don't want you to walk you through their resume. That's absolutely not what you should be doing here. And you should really just be thinking about the impact that you left at previous roles. Examples of results that you've produced and why these results are relevant to whatever company that you're applying for now. They should be able to bridge that gap directly. It's also really an opportunity for you to kind of showcase your personality and your work ethic, I like to say. You want to talk about any extracurriculars, especially if you're coming out of college right now. These things are very important to recruiters, as well as volunteer experiences that you had. People like wrapping up with hobbies in this, but unless I have extra time left over, usually if I feel like I'm talking too long, I recommend this to students as well. This is the section I would leave out, but talking about hobbies can sometimes talk to the person a little bit more about which personalities like. So that's something you can also include there as well. Other questions you might be asked. This is another very popular one. Tell me about your strengths. Tell me about your weaknesses, I like to say. These are really just questions that are there to kind of test your ability to conduct self-assessment of your own skills. So you want to really focus more on specific skills that are pertaining to the job you're applying for. So if you're applying for a very technical position right now, let's say with a software company, right? You want to focus on probably something a little bit more technical, or let's say your analytical skills or something like that. You'll make it harder on yourself if you give them a more general umbrella term. My top strength is communication. My top strength is being organized, right? Because those are more broad. And again, the examples you give, right, they could be all over the place. You want something more directly related to what you're interviewing for right now. You want to talk about how these skills have helped you be successful before in the past. For the area, for the weakness, right? I don't even like to call it that. I always tell students that's a mindset thing, right? When you say weakness, you're assuming this is something that you're lacking in, right? Instead, call it area of improvement. That's what I like to say. Area of improvement is just something a skill that you have, right? That's not as strong as maybe some of your other skills. There's a lot of latent potential there. So you'd be surprised at how much, the small tweak of mindset can change the whole tone of the conversation. So you want to avoid describing any skills that might be detrimental to the position you're applying for. So if you're applying to an office assistant position, right? If you say you're disorganized, that might not be the best thing to say there. But with any area of improvement that you bring up, you have to follow up with what you're doing to either address this area of improvement or maybe how you've been improving either in your previous roles or other things that you're doing. I have a student of mine who's an international student from South Korea, and he used to always say his biggest concern was that people wouldn't understand him, that his accent was too thick. So whenever he says that, he always backs it up. He's like, I've been trying to engage more of my American peers, and he's actually in a Toastmasters course now where he actually helps the lead person. So it's really awesome. You want to give examples where it can visibly showcase the growth you've been experiencing. I'll do one more question. So this is what I like to call the conflict question. You're going to be asked this in many, many different ways. When was the last time you had a conflict with somebody at work? When was the last time you were supervising somebody and they didn't do what they were supposed to do? When was the last time you disagreed with somebody or somebody disagreed with you? Or it could be really mean. They ask you, when was the time you disagreed with either a supervisor or someone who's more senior than you? So that's, I think, really the worst way they can ask you it. And you want to approach this question really just by treating it as walking through a story, right? You should have some sort of, there's students who have told me that I've never encountered any issues with anybody before, right? And I find that a little hard to believe though. But again, in any case, if you really don't have a story, right, then you really just walk through what you would do in this situation. The themes that the interviewer is going to be looking for are conflict mediation, conflict resolution, your listening skills, working with other people to understand different perspectives, and maintaining relationships after the conflict, right? A big part of this that they'll be looking for is what you do after the matter is resolved. You just never talk to this person again, or do you go and make sure everything's all cool and then there aren't going to be any problems between the two of you if you were to sign and work together again. So there are many more questions that you can be asked, but these are definitely 3 questions you'll definitely be asked. And hopefully this will give you some insight on how you can tackle these during the interview.
Yeah, that's great. So kind of building off of that, a tricky situation that a lot of students or interviewees find themselves in is not knowing the answer to a question that they're asked. So how should someone respond to a question that they don't know the answer to?
Don't panic. That's probably good advice right off the bat. More often than not, right, you probably do know the answer. I would say you can ask the interviewer to either repeat the question or clarify the question a little bit. Ask for more time to think about it because you'd be surprised. Sometimes it might just be the heat of the moment. Everybody gets a blank every now and then. So ask for more time. It's totally normal. They're not going to, okay, this is not good that they ask more time. If all else fails, I say honesty is definitely the best policy. You can say something like, that's a really great question. At this time, I'm afraid I'm not really familiar with the topic, but I would love to look into this topic more and follow up with you later once I have learned more about this, right? Absolutely. Just, I would say the worst thing you can do here is probably just start talking with no agenda, with no plan of how this answer is going to turn, and try to find an answer as you're speaking. So what do they call it? Thinking out loud. I would definitely not recommend that because you risk going off on tangents and then you're distracting the person. It's just not a good look. So honesty is the best policy for this one, definitely.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So after the interview has come to a conclusion, what type of questions should you ask? What kind of questions should you ask your interviewer, and are there any topics that maybe you should steer clear of or avoid?
Mm-hmm. So recruiters have told me that I've worked with, right, is don't ask questions that can be easily answered through a quick Google search. Like, how many hours do I have to work? How much will I get paid? How many people work for your organization? Things like that. Definitely avoid any personal questions. And I would also advise not getting too political here. Things you can ask about company culture. That's one of my favorite things to ask about. Ask the interviewer what's their favorite part about working at this company, right? Maybe what are some of the company's values? Learn about the different affinity groups that are within the organization. If there are not any affinity groups, right, you can ask, will there be affinity groups created in the future? And if so, how can I get involved with that? Again, that shows initiative. Ask about professional development opportunities as well as growth within the organization. And my personal favorite question to ask when interviewers, when I was interviewing, was I always like to ask, what were some of the challenges that the interviewers themselves faced when they either first started their job or when they were young professionals? So there's a lot of good insight. There's a lot of good candid insight you'll get that you probably won't get anywhere else. Especially, again, these are industry professionals in the field that you're trying to go into. So those are, I guess, some of the things you can talk about. You just want to try to start a discussion. You don't want them to respond to you as like in one word or like three sentences, and then that'd be the end of it. So try to have, I would say, 2 to 3 questions prepped at the very least. This discussion should go for at least, I would say, 5 to 10 minutes, hopefully.
So do you have any tips in terms of how someone should act or present themselves in an interview?
Yeah. So like with whatever you're wearing to the interview, you want to try and minimize as many distractions as possible. Personally, I don't think handshakes are ever going to be the same again, even after the pandemic fully slows down. But body language and expression reveal a lot about you, right? And people can still see that even if you're virtual. So I always tell my students that whenever they're at a networking event, effective networking is be nice to people, right? It's when you think about it like that, right? It makes it a lot more easier almost, right? That a smile and enthusiasm in your tone when you're talking, right, really goes a long way. I like to recommend that you should really be in interview mode the moment you step into either the office or the building, right? That's whether you're sitting in the waiting room or any interactions you have with staff when you first arrive. These are things that are being noted down. So definitely stay off your phone when you're in the waiting room, right? Don't be fidgeting around your chair. Don't be slouching. And again, if you are doing an in-person interview and you are comfortable with a handshake and they are shaking your hand, right? Make sure you shake everybody's hand. Don't shake one person's hand. This is advice back in the day. I say back in the day, but don't shake one person's hand and not shake other people's hand. And when people are talking, right, you definitely want to acknowledge what they're saying. Don't stare into their soul, right? That's too much. But definitely make good eye contact, nod as they're speaking so they know that you're listening. So if you're able to incorporate maybe some of the things that they're saying when they're giving context or giving a question, right, that really kind of just expands on, makes you look even better. If you're able to incorporate things that they're saying into the interview. In group interviews, this is almost absolutely necessary. So
Great.
I'll
So
leave it at that.
now, of course, and for the foreseeable future, a lot of interviews are being held online, like we've spoke about throughout this.
Mhm.
So do you have any additional tips in terms of how you can excel in a virtual interview?
It all starts with having a nice, comfortable environment that you're interviewing in. You don't want to be interviewing in a Starbucks or somewhere loud, right? If you have any family members or there's a lot of stuff going on behind you, right? You want to try to minimize that as much as possible. You want to be in your zone almost, right? So I recommend finding a nicely well lit part of wherever you're living, right? If you have any people that you live with, let them know that you're going to be interviewing during the hours of, let's say, 3 to 4 today, and you need quiet. So once you have that, right, it's really just making sure, I think, checking in advance that all the technology works, especially if it's a platform that you've never used before, right? You want to make sure that all the technology works. So the day of, you're not trying to fidgeting, trying to resolve any technical difficulties. So, but on the actual day of the interview, right, this is something that I've noticed a lot in students. You always want to try to have your webcam on, right? Whether you're attending a workshop with a lot of people or one-on-one. I've had one-on-one appointments with students where you don't turn on the webcam. It's optional, but again, it definitely shows you're more engaged, right? You want to try to bring as much of that in-person interview back as possible. So having your webcam on definitely shows again that you're engaged, that you're attentive and you're paying attention. And lastly, I'll say is again, you definitely, at this point, you definitely need to research more about the company, because especially if you're on a web chat, right, and you get less face time with the person, you definitely want to know your audience, who you're talking to, having a notepad on the side or even notes on the side of your computer. This is again is an added bonus, but I definitely wouldn't recommend you reading off a sheet of paper. It becomes really obvious that when your eyes are darting back and forth on the screen, that you're reading straight off a sheet of paper, but instead make bullet points to keep yourself on track when you're speaking. So again, you make sure you're not talking in circles or going off on tangents. It's really kind of keep you grounded. So those would be some tips for virtual interviewing that I think are going to be more trending moving forward, definitely.
Great. So now just kind of wrap things up here. What should applicants do immediately after the interview? And is it
Yeah.
okay to follow up with an employer if you don't hear back
Mhm.
within so many days? And if so, how long should you wait?
Yeah, definitely get the contact information of every single person you speak with. Sometimes it's easy. It's only one person. It's the same person who emailed you. That's easy, right? But again, if more people interview you that you don't have the contact information, make sure you get their information. Exchanging business cards is really the easiest way to do this. But what you want to do is you want to send a separate thank you email to basically every single person you spoke with. And I also recommend referencing either something memorable or noteworthy from the conversation that you had with the person, so they remember who you are, especially if you're interviewing like 20, 30 people a day. One piece of advice that I tell students to do is you can actually pre-type your emails the night before, add the customization. It'll just increase the speed. They'll be faster and ready to go. So you definitely want to have those sent out pretty much right after the interview. Don't wait on this. The longer you wait, the more likely they are to forget you. If you don't hear back from an employer, how long you should wait, I would say if a timetable is given to you, they say they'll get back to you in 3 days, right? Then I would definitely wait those 3 days first. And again, if they don't get back to you after 3 days, then I would give them a call or send them an email. If they say we'll get back to you tomorrow and they don't do that, same thing. But if they don't tell you how long it'll take for them to get back to you, usually I would wait about a week. If I don't hear back within a week from an organization that again was really sold on me and I feel like I did well in the interview, I'll just send them an email, quick email. Thank you again for your time last week, your entire team meeting me. I really enjoyed our conversation, yada, yada, yada. At this time, I was just wondering if there were any updates from the recruiting team, and then just thank them for the time. It's very straightforward, and most of the time they will reply to you if they are engaged with you as a candidate. Be mindful of business days versus regular days. So sometimes they say they'll get back to me in 10 business days, right? It's been 10 days, and 10 business days is really, if you think about it, you have to exclude the weekends, right? And if there are any holidays in between, it's actually a little bit longer. So just be mindful of those as well. But eventually, if you feel like you interviewed the company and they haven't gotten back to you after, let's say, a month, and you've been sending them follow-up emails, it's time to move on, unfortunately, right? You can't be putting all your eggs in one basket. You have to make sure, again, you're interviewing other places as well. So that would be the advice for that.
Great. Well, that does it for us here today. Thanks again, Jia Wei, for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been great. Thank you, Jackson.
All right, great. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And for more interviews like this, please subscribe. Have a great day, everyone.